The elderly black man stood at the doorway, holding a single suitcase. His adoptive children pointed toward the street. "We're done taking care of you," one said coldly. "You have nothing. We're not your charity anymore." He lowered his head, heart shattered, until a sleek black car pulled up. A security agent stepped out, staring at the children in disbelief. "Sir," he said to the old man, "your board wants to know where you've been." The kids froze. Their poor adoptive father wasn't poor at all. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. By the time the neighborhood woke up, Mr. Thomas Avery had already been awake for hours. The sun was just stretching over the old maple trees when he stepped out into the small backyard, his knees cracking softly, his hands already stained with a bit of soil. The air smelled like wet grass and tomatoes, and somewhere down the street, a dog yawned into a bark. Thomas liked mornings best. Before the noise, before the complaints. Before the house remembered it didn't really want him there, he adjusted the faded brim of his cap, the one his late wife used to tease him about for being older than the moon, and knelt by the little garden patch he'd carved out along the back fence. It wasn't much, but it was his. Tomatoes, collard greens, peppers. A few flowers his neighbor had given him. "For color, Mr. Avery," she'd said with a smile. He'd never been rich in things, but he'd always had enough love to give. That was the one thing he knew for sure. "Stop," he pressed his thumb gently into the soil, checking the moisture, humming a little gospel tune under his breath. His joints ached, but he moved with the slow, steady care of a man who'd never rushed a day in his life. He glanced back at the house, the one he'd worked 3 jobs for, the one where he'd raised 3 kids who didn't share his blood, but shared his last name. Michael, Jasmine, Devin. He'd met them all at different times, in different storms. Michael had come first, just 6 years old at the time, all bones and big eyes in a too-thin jacket, clutching a stuffed bear at a group home where Thomas's church used to volunteer. Jasmine arrived a year later, quiet and stubborn, with a scar on her knee and an attitude bigger than her little frame. Devin came last, as a baby, left on a relative's couch, and then left again, and somehow ended up in Thomas's arms, like he'd been meant to be there from the start. Thomas had been younger then, mid-30s, still strong, still fast, still believing the world always rewarded kindness. He wasn't naive anymore, but he'd never regret choosing them. He straightened slowly, rubbing his lower back, and smiled at the memory of 3 little kids racing through this same backyard, plastic swords in hand, barefoot in the grass, laughing like the world was theirs and nothing could go wrong. He'd patched scraped knees. He'd worked night shifts. He'd learned how to braid Jasmine's hair from a YouTube video and a whole lot of trial and error. They called him Dad long before the paperwork said so. And he'd meant it when he promised them, "You'll always have a home with me, always." Inside the house, a door slammed. The spell of the morning broke. Thomas flinched slightly, then sighed, wiping his hands on his old jeans. He walked back toward the porch, the screen door squeaking like it always did. He stepped into the kitchen. The sink was already full of dishes from the night before. Greasy plates, half-empty glasses, forks floating in cloudy water. He'd washed them before bed, but someone had eaten late again and dumped everything in the sink without rinsing. He rolled up his sleeves. Again, the sound of footsteps came from the hallway, heavy, impatient. "Yo, is there any coffee?" Devin's voice called out, annoyed like the world owed him caffeine. "Good morning to you too." "Son," Thomas said softly, turning the faucet on, "there's some in the pot. I left it on warm for you." Devin, 24 now, wandered in with his phone in hand, not looking up from the screen. "This is old. You couldn't make fresh?" "It's from this morning," Thomas replied. "Only been a couple hours." "Yeah, well, it tastes like yesterday." Devin made a face, pouring some into a mug anyway. Thomas didn't argue. He never did. He just smiled faintly. "If you want, I can make a new one." Devin shrugged, already scrolling again. Whatever. He walked out without another word. Thomas rinsed a plate, stacked it carefully in the drying rack, and didn't let his smile fade. It wobbled, but it stayed. He'd learned how to live with that wobble. A few minutes later, Jasmine breezed in, phone to her ear, heels clicking on the tile. She was 27 now, sharp cheekbones, sharper tongue, dressed like she was always one conversation away from a promotion that never quite came. "No, girl, he's still here," she was saying. "You know how it is. I can't even bring anybody over without it turning into a whole charity vibe." Thomas pretended not to hear. She opened the fridge, frowned at the containers inside. "Did you cook again yesterday?" she asked, covering the bottom of the phone with her hand. "I made some stew," he said, hopeful. "Thought y'all could—" "Dad," she interrupted, trying not to roll her eyes too obviously. "We told you, stop cooking so much." "We don't even eat this." Thomas blinked. "I thought you liked the stew with the—" "That was years ago," she snapped softly. "We have different tastes now. Just, I don't know, eat at the center or something when you want to play chef." Her words, casual and sharp, slid right into him like a slow knife. He nodded. "All right, baby, I'll keep that in mind." She sighed, already back in her phone conversation. "Anyway, like I was saying, he just stays here all day using our water, our electricity, our space. Our, not his." She walked out, still talking, voice fading down the hall. Thomas stood alone in the kitchen a moment longer, hands resting on the edge of the counter, head bowed. He whispered a little prayer under his breath. "Lord, give 'em softer hearts. Give me patience while you do it." He didn't ask for wealth. He didn't ask for revenge. He just asked for kindness. For them, not for himself. He washed the rest of the dishes. By the time Michael came downstairs, tying his tie and adjusting his watch like he was late for something important, Thomas had breakfast on the table. Scrambled eggs, toast, sliced fruit. Michael, now 30, gave it a passing glance. "You know we didn't ask you to cook," he said, grabbing just one piece of toast and eating it standing up. "You don't have to act like, I don't know, some 1950s housewife." Thomas laughed softly. "I know, I like taking care of y'all." "Yeah, well," Michael muttered, checking his phone notifications. "Just don't expect us to clap every time you use the stove." He swallowed the last bite, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. "You got enough gas in your car?" Thomas called gently. "You been driving a lot lately? I can help with a—" Michael waved him off without looking back. "Your pension already pays the bills. It's fine." The door shut behind him. Thomas stared at the empty doorway for a second, then at the untouched eggs, the untouched fruit, the chair nobody sat in anymore. He pulled out his own chair, sat down, and ate quietly, alone. Later that afternoon, he sat on the tiny front porch, shelling peas into a bowl, the sun warm on his shoulders. He liked doing small things with his hands, things that made meals, things his wife used to hum through as they cooked side by side. He could almost hear her sometimes. "My slow, sweet Thomas," she would tease, never in a hurry, always on time. She'd been gone 10 years now. He missed her most in the spaces between noise. "Mr. Avery?" A familiar voice called. He looked up and smiled. "Afternoon, Mrs. Jennings," he said. Carla Jennings, mid-50s, kind eyes, flour on her hands from baking, leaned on the fence next door. "You out here all by yourself again?" she asked. He nodded, still shelling peas. "Kids are busy. Got important lives." She pressed her lips together. Important, huh? She'd seen the way they talked to him, the way they looked past him, the way they used his pension money to cover car payments and salon trips, but never bought him new shoes. "You know that's not right the way they speak to you," she said gently. "You deserve better than that, Thomas." He smiled, that same small, unshaken smile. "They're just stressed," he said. "Life's heavier for young folks now. They'll come around." She sighed. "You always say that." "'Cause I still believe it," he replied. He didn't mention the letters tucked away in his room. He didn't mention the phone calls he took outside so his kids wouldn't overhear. He didn't mention the meetings he pretended were spam when they were actually important. He hid those things carefully. Not because he was ashamed, because he was afraid. Afraid that if they knew the truth about him, they'd treat him even worse. Thomas Avery looked down at his weathered hands, lines and scars and years of work etched into his skin. His kids thought they knew him. To them, he was old, he was slow, he was broke. He was a burden they were doing a favor by letting stay. That was the story they told themselves, and he let them, because he loved them too much to force them to see. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. Not love, not sacrifice, not what he really was. The lie they lived in. The one where he was old, broke, and useless was about to crack wide open, and none of them were ready for what was underneath. By the next morning, the Avery household was already alive with irritation. Not noise, not busyness, just irritation. The kind that lived in the walls like mildew. Thomas stood at the stove, carefully flipping pancakes, the fluffy vanilla kind Jasmine used to beg for when she was 7. He used the same recipe card his wife used to write on. The edges yellowed, corners so. But now, it was just another thing for the grown kids to complain about. Devin walked in first, rubbing sleep from his eyes, wearing the expensive sneakers Thomas had bought him 3 Christmases ago. A gift he never once said thank you for. Devin sniffed the air and groaned. "Oh man, pancakes again? Seriously?" Thomas smiled. "You loved these growing up." "Yeah, growing up," Devin said, grabbing a bowl of cereal instead. "I'm not a kid anymore, Dad." Thomas nodded gently. Right. You want eggs instead?" "No, I want you to stop making the whole house smell like syrup every morning," Devin muttered, dumping cereal into a bowl and walking off without another glance. Thomas swallowed his sigh. He flipped the last pancake and set the plate neatly on the table. Jasmine entered next, scrolling her phone at lightning speed, heels clicking too loud on the tile. She paused, looked at the food, and wrinkled her nose. "Ugh, carbs? I'm trying to lose weight for the event fee." "Oh," Thomas said softly, "I can make you—" "No, Dad," she cut in sharply. "You don't have to make anything, just don't fill the table with stuff nobody wants." "Nobody." He nodded again. "Okay, sweet pea." She didn't hear the crack in his voice. She didn't try to hear it. Michael came last, suit jacket slung over his shoulder, tapping his watch impatiently. He didn't look at the pancakes, didn't look at Thomas, just leaned into the fridge and grabbed an energy drink. "Is the laundry done?" he asked. "Yes," Thomas replied, "folded and on your bed." "And the car," Michael continued. "Did you put gas in it?" "Yes, sir, it's all set." Michael gave a curt nod. Not gratitude, just acknowledgement. Good, I've got a busy day. Thomas tried a smile. Drive safe. Michael didn't respond. He walked out the door, letting it slam behind him. The quiet afterward felt heavier than shouting. Thomas sat down alone, staring at the uneaten plate of pancakes he'd made with care. But, remembering how once upon a time, the kids used to fight over who got the first one. Now they wouldn't even take the last one. Over the next few days, the small cuts became deeper, sharper, more frequent. Thomas lived inside a pattern of little heartbreaks. They complained about everything. Why are you folding my shirts like this? They get wrinkled. Dad, stop putting fruit in the fridge. It makes it cold. Ugh, why is the TV so loud when you watch it? He never argued. He never defended himself. He just smiled, nodded, and tried to do better. Jasmine laughed one evening as Thomas walked into the living room, wearing his usual cardigan. Faded brown, elbows worn thin, a little frayed at the cuffs. Dad, she said through a giggle, you look like a librarian from the 1800s. Michael added, honestly, why don't you just buy something new? That sweater's older than Devin. Devin chimed in. Man looks like he's about to tell ghost stories by a fireplace. They laughed. He chuckled along, but inside, it hurt more than they knew. His wife had knitted that cardigan for him, their last Christmas together. He never told them that. They never asked. They treated him like an inconvenience. When their friends came over, they'd whisper to Thomas, hey, Dad, can you stay in your room for a bit? We don't want the vibe to be weird. The vibe. He was the weird vibe. A man who raised them. A man who fed them. A man who stayed up countless nights when they were sick, scared, or crying. Now, they didn't even want him in the living room. And he agreed every time. Quietly, with a soft smile. Of course, baby, y'all have fun. He would go to his room, close the door, and sit on the edge of the bed, listening to them laugh without him. One afternoon, as Thomas was sweeping the front porch, Mrs. Carla Jennings stepped out of her house holding a bag of fresh muffins. Thomas, she called softly, come sit with me a moment. ... He leaned his broom against the railing and followed her to the little bench between their houses. She handed him a muffin and waited until he took a bite. Tell me, she said gently, why are your children treating you like you're a burden? Thomas looked down at his hands. Hands that had worked factories, warehouses, delivery trucks. Hands that built his kids' bunk beds, packed their lunches, fixed everything they broke. They're just stressed, he said like always. Work's hard, life's hard. They don't mean nothing by it. Carla frowned. Baby, I've lived long enough to know the difference between stress and disrespect. What they're doing is wrong. Thomas sighed, turning the muffin over in his hands. They'll grow out of it. She shook her head. Not unless you teach them to. But Thomas didn't want conflict. Not with the children he raised. I don't want to upset them, he murmured. Carla gave him a long, sad look. You deserve to be loved, Thomas, not tolerated. He smiled softly. I'll be all right. But she wasn't convinced. Something in his eyes, a flicker of loneliness, a bruise too deep for skin, told her everything she needed to know. Back inside the house, Thomas slipped quietly into his small room, the one the kids called the storage space because it wasn't a real bedroom. He closed the door softly, sat on the edge of the bed, and reached under the mattress. He pulled out letters, documents, emails printed out, financial statements, voicemails saved on a cheap flip phone, offers, requests, reminders, opportunities. His hands trembled slightly as he thumbed through them. He had ignored all of them, because he knew, if the children discovered the truth about who he really was, they wouldn't treat him better. They'd treat him worse. They would want his money, his assets, his connections, his legal rights. They already used his pension like it was their inheritance. What would they do if they learned much more? Thomas folded the letters carefully, tucked them away, and wiped his eyes. "I'll tell them someday," he whispered to himself. "Just not today." Outside his window, the sun dipped lower, casting a soft orange glow on the neighborhood. Life went on. The kids lived loudly. Thomas lived quietly. And the line between love and neglect grew thinner each day. He hoped, truly hoped, they'd grow kinder. But life had a way of bringing truth forward, especially when people believe the lie too long. The lie that he was old, broke, and useless. The lie that was about to collapse. The morning it happened, the Avery house felt wrong. Too quiet, too tense, like the air itself knew something painful was coming. Thomas woke early as usual. He brewed tea, softened butter for toast, and started humming one of his wife's favorite hymns. He set the table neatly, one plate for each of his children. Even though they rarely sat with him anymore, he waited. But none of them came down for breakfast. Still humming, he carried the plates to the sink and washed them gently. He didn't want the dishes to pile up. Mess stressed the kids out, they always said. He was drying the last cup when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, sharp, purposeful. He turned just as Michael entered the kitchen, followed closely by Jasmine and Devin. All three stood in a line like they were attending some kind of family meeting. Only Thomas hadn't been invited to understand what the meeting was about. Michael cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, too formal, too rehearsed. "We need to talk." Thomas blinked and set the cup down. "All right, son, what's going on?" Devin crossed his arms. Jasmine rolled her eyes before looking away. Michael exhaled loudly, like what he was about to say was a burden. "It's about your room," he said flatly. Thomas's smile faltered slightly. "My room?" It took a moment for the words to settle. A long, painful moment. Thomas swallowed. "But that's my room." "It's a storage room," Jasmine corrected, tapping her manicured nails on her phone. "We could use it for something useful." "Useful?" Thomas repeated softly. "A home office," Michael said. "A makeup space," Jasmine added. "A gaming room," Devin chimed in, excited. Thomas stared at them, his grown children, the ones he'd raised with tired hands and endless patience. And he felt something inside him press and bruise. I don't have anywhere else to go," he whispered. Jasmine shrugged. "Well, you'll figure something out." Michael stepped forward, as if he were speaking to a stranger, not the man who taught him how to tie his shoes. "Dad, you can't just stay here forever," he said. "We're adults. We need our space." Thomas's voice cracked. "I never meant to be in your way." "You are," Devin snapped. "It's exhausting having you around all the time." Thomas flinched. He looked at each of their faces. Not one showed kindness. Not one. He tried to steady his breath. "Please let me stay until I find somewhere. Just a little time. That's all I'm asking." Jasmine rolled her eyes dramatically. "Dad, stop being dramatic." "Yeah," Devin scoffed. You act like we kicked you out on the streets already. Michael, deciding he had the final word, declared coldly, "We're not asking, Dad. Pack your things. Today." The world tilted. Something inside Thomas, something quiet and gentle, that had survived every hardship, began to crack. "You're not my real kids," he whispered, before he could stop himself. "But I loved you like you were." Michael didn't soften. "You're not our real dad, and we don't owe you anything." The sentence hit him harder than any physical blow. His breath shortened. His fingers shook. He felt his heart, a heart that had given and given and given, fold in on itself. "Please," Thomas whispered, voice shaking. "Don't do this." But his children weren't listening. They'd already made up their minds. Devin stepped forward and grabbed Thomas's old suitcase, the one he'd used decades ago when he adopted them. Without hesitation, he yanked it from the closet and dragged it through the hallway. "Stop," Thomas pleaded. "That suitcase it was from my wife." But Devin wasn't listening. He tossed the suitcase out the front door, the leather scraping painfully against the concrete. Thomas hurried outside, stumbling slightly, shame burning through him. His children followed, expressionless. A few neighbors, hearing the commotion, peeked out from their porches. Mrs. Jennings stepped outside too, frowning deeply. "What's going on here?" she called. Michael folded his arms. "Family business, Carla." "It doesn't look like you're treating your family right," she snapped. Jasmine scoffed. "Please, stay out of it." Mrs. Jennings shook her head. "Thomas deserves better than this. Y'all should be ashamed." But the Avery children brushed her off like dust. Devin pointed at the suitcase lying near the porch. "There," he said. "Take the hint." Thomas's lips trembled. "I loved you," he whispered. "All I ever wanted was—" "Enough!" Jasmine shouted. "God, Dad, stop acting like we're monsters. You're the one who's been living off our money." Mrs. Jennings gasped. "Your father's pension kept y'all fed." Michael waved a dismissive hand. "He's broke, Carla. You don't know anything." Then, the final blow. "You're useless," the eldest child said. Thomas staggered. "And we're done pretending." Silence swallowed the street. The neighbors stared, mouths open. Mrs. Jennings covered her heart. Thomas felt the world drop out from under him. He looked at their faces and realized he didn't recognize them anymore. These were not the children he raised. These were not the children he sacrificed for. These were strangers wearing the faces of people he once loved. His breath came shallow. His eyes burned. "Lord, help me," he murmured under his breath. At that moment, a sleek black SUV turned onto the street. Tinted windows, polished exterior, moving with purpose. It slowed, stopped right in front of the Avery house. Everyone froze. Michael frowned. "Who the hell is that?" The driver's door opened with a soft click. A sharply dressed man stepped out. Crisp suit, silver tie clip, polished shoes that cost more than Michael's monthly salary. He held a leather briefcase. He looked around, then spotted Thomas standing near the porch. His expression softened instantly. "Mr. Avery," he called warmly, crossing the lawn with respect that felt strange in this place. "Sir, I've been looking everywhere for you." Thomas blinked, confused. The man stopped in front of him and bowed his head slightly. "Sir," he said, "the board is concerned. You missed the shareholder meeting this morning." Dead silence. Jasmine blinked. "Shareholder? Devin's jaw dropped. Him? Michael stuttered. There must be some kind of mistake. Mr. Hale, the sharply dressed stranger, didn't even spare them a glance. He spoke to Thomas alone. The company is awaiting your approval on the $400 million expansion deal, he said clearly, loudly, so the whole street heard. Mrs. Jennings' hand flew to her mouth. The neighbors gasped. Thomas closed his eyes. The secret he had protected for decades was no longer a secret. For a long, breathless moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint idle of the SUV's engine and a bird chirping somewhere down the street, like nothing extraordinary was happening at all. Thomas Avery stood on the porch, suitcase at his feet, eyes on the man in the suit. Shame still clung to him like a second skin from everything his kids had just said. And now, on top of that, this. He sighed softly. You found me, huh? The man broke into a relieved smile. Sir, you have no idea how hard that was. He stepped closer and extended his hand. Robert Hale, he said, CFO. We've spoken many times on the phone, but it's an honor to finally meet you in person. Thomas shook his hand gently, like this was a casual visit, and not the moment his entire double life was unraveling in front of an audience. Good to see you, son, he said. Didn't expect you to come all the way out here. Robert gestured politely toward the house. With respect, sir, we were worried. You haven't responded to the last 3 emails. The board is on edge. We can't approve an expansion of this size without your signature. Michael finally found his voice. What expansion? He demanded, stepping forward. What are you talking about? Robert barely flicked his gaze toward him. I'm sorry, this is a private corporate matter, he said curtly. This is our house, Jasmine snapped, and that's our dad. Anything involving him, involve. Robert turned fully toward her, brows lifting. Your dad, he repeated slowly. His eyes dropped to the suitcase lying on the ground, to Thomas's trembling hands, to the way the children stood in a tight, defensive line, facing him, not beside him. Mrs. Jennings spoke up from her porch, voice sharp. These ungrateful kids were just throwing him out. Robert's expression changed. It didn't soften. It got colder. I see, he said quietly. Devin tried to scoff, but his voice shook. Look, man, you clearly got the wrong guy. Our dad doesn't own anything. He's retired and broke. We've been supporting him. Robert stared at him like he'd just spoken a language he didn't understand. Broke? He repeated. He turned back to Thomas. Is that what they believe about you? Thomas's shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had spent years hiding his past so they could feel, what? Superior? In control? So they wouldn't chase him for his money instead of his love? He suddenly realized how badly that had backfired. Robert let out a low breath. Sir, with your permission. Thomas gave a tiny nod. Go on, he said quietly. Might as well know it all now. Robert clasped his hands in front of him and addressed the driveway, the porch, the neighbors, and the 3 adult children who had just called their father useless. Your father, he began, voice steady and professional, isn't broke. He is one of the founding partners of Avery and Lane Logistics Incorporated. The company currently sits at a market valuation near $950 million. The effect on the children was immediate. Michael's mouth fell open. Jasmine's phone slipped from her hand and hit the ground. Devin blinked as if someone had unplugged his brain. The neighbors murmured in shock. Avery and Lane? One man whispered. Ain't that the company with all those delivery hubs? My nephew works there. Another added. They big. Mrs. Jennings just stared. Thomas, she whispered. Robert continued, unfazed. Your father, he went on, nodding toward Thomas, holds a majority share position. He left day-to-day operations years ago, but he never relinquished his equity. He has controlling vote over major expansions, acquisitions, and restructures. Michael choked. See, controlling over what? Robert looked at him now, eyes cool. Over whether we move forward with a $400 million expansion deal that will reshape how we run national distribution, he said, which is why the board is highly concerned about his absence. Jasmine staggered backward, like the words themselves had weight. Dad, she whispered. Thomas stared at the ground, cheeks wet, voice quiet. I told y'all I worked in warehouses, he said. Just never told you I helped build the company that owned them. Devin shook his head desperately. No, that doesn't make sense. If he had that kind of money, why's he living like this? Robert's gaze softened for the first time. Because he chose to, he replied simply. He turned to the neighbors, almost as if giving a presentation. Decades ago, he said, before most of you ever heard of us, Mr. Avery and his partner built a logistics network from scratch. He drove trucks, loaded pallets, slept in warehouses. He knew the ground level better than any executive does now. And then, he paused gently, nodding toward Thomas. And then his wife passed away. A shadow crossed Thomas's face. Old grief, never fully gone. He stepped away, Robert said. Not because he had to, because he chose to. He told the board, and I quote, "If my kids don't have a father, what good is my money?" Michael's breathing hitched. Jasmine covered her mouth. Devin shook his head slowly. No, that can't be true. Dad, why didn't you ever tell us? Thomas laughed, not out of humor, but out of pure disbelief at the situation. You barely listen when I tell you dinner's ready, he said softly. What was you gonna do with something like this? He wiped his cheeks with the back of his hand, then looked up at Robert. You didn't have to tell them all that, he murmured. Yes, sir, Robert replied. I did. He turned to the children. You need to understand something, he said. Your father didn't stay here because he was stuck. He stayed because he wanted to, because he loves you, because he chose a small life with you over a big life without you. The weight of that truth was heavier than anything they'd ever heard. Thomas shifted uncomfortably and added quietly, Your mama and I, we always said we'd give you more than we had. So I thought, if I let the world think I was just some old man with a pension, I could give you normal. Thought that was enough. He shook his head, voice cracking. Never thought you'd use it to throw me away. The words landed like stones. Jasmine burst into tears. You thought I was broke, he finished softly. You thought I was in your way. You thought I was useless. Devin's eyes glistened. We were just stressed, okay? We didn't mean... Robert cut him off, politely but firmly. With respect, he said, people show who they are when they think someone has nothing to offer them. He let that hang in the air. Then he spoke louder, for all the neighbors to hear. For clarity, he said, Mr. Avery owns majority shares in Avery and Lane Logistics, several commercial real estate developments, multiple long-term trust accounts, royalty agreements from patented route optimization systems, and the controlling vote on expansion projects worth nearly $1 billion combined. Devin's knees buckled. Michael's eyes filled with panic. Jasmine grabbed the porch railing to steady herself. Mrs. Jennings just whispered, My God, Thomas. Thomas exhaled slowly and bent down to pick up his suitcase. He held it like a weight he'd carried his whole life, some of it full of love, some of it full of sorrow. His children rushed forward at once. "Dad, wait," Michael said, swallowing his pride so fast it almost choked him. "You don't have to go. We were heated. You can stay. Of course you can stay." "Yeah," Devin chimed in quickly, voice wobbling between panic and fake sweetness. "We were just playing, old man. You know we joke around. Come on, don't be like that." Jasmine wiped her tears and forced a smile that looked more like desperation. "Dad," she pleaded, "we love you. You know that. Please, just come inside. We'll talk. We'll fix breakfast. Your favorite, okay?" The shift was instant. Too instant. Neighbors watched with raised brows. Mrs. Jennings narrowed her eyes. Thomas studied their faces. The sudden warmth, the trembling lips, the arms reaching out now that they knew he wasn't broke after all. And for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't automatically forgive. He didn't automatically excuse. He didn't automatically take the blame. He straightened slowly, and his voice, usually soft and gentle, carried a new weight. "You didn't want me," he said quietly, "when you thought I had nothing." Their smiles faltered. "You didn't want me," he repeated, louder this time, "when you thought I was just a bill to pay, a mouth to feed, a burden on your space." Tears spilled down his cheeks. "You didn't want your father," he said, voice breaking, "until you found out he was rich." No one spoke, not his children, not the neighbors, not even the birds this time. Robert stepped aside and opened the SUV door. "Mr. Avery," he said gently, "the board meeting is waiting. We can drive you to the office or anywhere else you'd like to go." Thomas looked one last time at the house he'd paid for, the children he'd raised, the life he'd given everything to. Then he wrapped his fingers more tightly around the suitcase and took a step toward the car. The moment Thomas placed one foot toward the SUV, panic exploded behind him like a bomb. "Dad, wait! Please don't get in that car! Dad, stop!" His children stumbled down the porch steps after him, tripping over their own desperation. Moments ago, they were ready to throw him out like trash. Now, they were scrambling like people watching their winning lottery ticket blow away in the wind. Neighbors leaned farther over fences, curtains shifted in windows. Mrs. Jennings stood with her arms folded, brows raised, watching the spectacle unfold like the universe had finally decided to balance the scales. Thomas didn't turn around yet. He didn't need to. He could hear everything in their suddenly sweet voices. He could hear the lies trembling under the sugar. "Dad," Jasmine said breathlessly, wiping her tears. We were stressed. You know how life is. We didn't mean any of it." "Yeah," Devin chimed in, smiling too wide, too fake. "We were just around. You know us." Michael stepped forward, trying to regain authority he no longer had. He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, the same shoulder he ignored for years. "Dad, come inside," he urged. "We can talk like a family." Thomas finally turned, slowly, like a man carrying decades of hurt. His eyes were red, not from weakness, but from the weight of everything he'd swallowed to keep his family together. He searched their faces. Not one of them looked sorry, only scared. Scared of losing the money they didn't even know existed yesterday. He spoke softly, but his voice cut sharper than a blade. "When I asked to stay," he said, "you told me I was in your way." They fell silent. "When I asked for time," he continued, "you rolled your eyes." Jasmine's lips trembled. "Dad, please?" "When I reminded you I'd raised you," he said, "you told me I wasn't your real father." Michael's breath caught. "We didn't mean when you thought I had nothing." He swallowed hard. "You treated me like nothing." The street was so quiet, a leaf skittering down the sidewalk sounded like thunder. Thomas looked down at his suitcase, old, battered, worn from years of holding his life together. "I carried this," he said, "when I adopted you, when I walked into courtrooms, when I filled out paperwork, when I promised judges I would give you a home." He lifted the suitcase slightly. "And now I'm carrying it because my own children threw me out." Jasmine burst into sobs. "Dad, we were wrong. Please, don't leave." But Thomas only shook his head. Robert Hale cleared his throat softly behind him. "Mr. Avery," he said gently, "I need to brief your family on a few things, if you allow." Thomas nodded. "Go on." Robert turned toward Michael, Jasmine, and Devin, corporate composure sharpening each word. "Your father," he said, "owns controlling interest in Avery and Lane. That means he alone has final say on any corporate projects, including the $400 million expansion." He let the number sit in the air. Devin nearly choked. $400 million? Robert continued calmly. "Yes, and beyond that, your father also owns multiple commercial properties, including the regional logistics hub in Dallas, the Northside Distribution Warehouse, and the Walker Industrial Complex." Jasmine blinked rapidly. "Dad, you own real estate?" Robert raised a hand. "I'm not finished." Their jaws dropped again. "Your father also owns 4 trust accounts set up by his late wife, valued at approximately $62 million collectively." Jasmine gasped. Michael staggered backward. Devin's eyes went glossy with greed. Thomas closed his eyes painfully. He'd kept all of this private, not because he wanted to hoard wealth, but because he wanted them to grow strong, not spoiled, not entitled, not dependent on money. "So, we're rich?" Devin breathed. Thomas snapped his eyes open, and for the first time in years, his voice rose. "No, I am rich." The words hit with the force of truth they were never ready for. "And you," he added, pointing gently but firmly at each of them, "are poor in the ways that matter most." Jasmine sobbed harder. "Dad, please." "No," he said softly, heartbreak thick in every syllable. "Don't call me Dad because you want money. Call me Dad because you mean it, because you feel it." Silence crashed again. Mrs. Jennings wiped tears from her eyes on the porch. A neighbor whispered, "Good for him." Thomas lifted his chin. "You didn't lose a rich man today," he said. "You lost the father who cooked for you, cleaned for you, waited up at night for you, loved you when you didn't deserve it." Michael's face crumpled. "Dad, we messed up." "Yes," Thomas whispered, "you did." He stepped toward the SUV, but Jasmine lunged forward and grabbed his arm. "Please," she cried, "please don't go. We'll change. We'll treat you better. We'll—" "Stop," Thomas said gently, removing her hand. "You're not crying for me. You're crying for what you think you lost." Jasmine sank to her knees. Devin whispered, "We'll never do it again. Just let us fix it." Michael added, voice cracking, "You can't leave us." Thomas hesitated. Then he delivered the line that shattered all 3 of them. "You left me first." A sob rippled through the crowd of neighbors. Robert opened the SUV door again. Thomas wiped his tears, braced his hand on the car frame, and turned back one final time. "You didn't want me," he said quietly, "when you thought I had nothing." He entered the SUV. Robert closed the door. The locks clicked. And for the first time since their mother died, the Avery children knew what abandonment felt like. They stood on the porch, broken, begging, sobbing, as the black SUV pulled away from the house. Mrs. Jennings stepped to their side, looking at them with a mix of sorrow and disappointment. She whispered, "Your father deserves the world, and you gave him scraps. The SUV disappeared around the corner. Their father was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. The SUV ride was quiet at first. Not awkward, not tense, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after the storm, when debris is still settling and you're trying to catch your breath from a life that's just changed shape. Thomas kept his eyes forward, hands folded in his lap, breathing slow and deep like his wife used to tell him to when life got too heavy. Robert drove without speaking, giving him room, something his children rarely gave him. Outside, the town rolled past the window. Familiar streets, familiar houses, familiar faces. But today everything felt farther away, smaller, duller, like Thomas was looking at his life from the outside for the first time. When they reached the highway, Robert finally spoke. "Sir, I need to say something." Thomas's gaze shifted slightly. "Go ahead." Robert tightened his grip on the wheel. "No man deserves what happened to you today." Thomas looked down at his hands, hands that had lifted crying children from nightmares, hands that wiped fevers, braided Jasmine's hair, fixed Devon's toys, signed adoption papers with trembling hope. "I should have told them," Thomas whispered. "Not about the money, about me, about what I gave up for them." "You shouldn't have had to," Robert replied. "A father shouldn't need wealth to earn respect." Thomas smiled sadly. "You'd be surprised what folks value these days." He leaned back against the seat, eyes drifting to the passing trees. "You know," he said softly, "my wife used to say, 'Love 'em so much they drown in it.' I did that, Robert. I drowned my kids in love. Maybe I didn't teach them how to swim on their own." Robert's voice gentled. "They took advantage of your heart. That's not your fault." Thomas closed his eyes, but he didn't answer. The yard felt colder than it had a few minutes earlier. Michael paced the porch, like someone trying to reconstruct a broken past. "He can't just leave," he muttered. "Right? He always forgives us." Jasmine was on the ground, completely undone, mascara streaking her cheeks, knees scraped from when she fell earlier. "This can't be happening," she sobbed. "I didn't mean those things. I was just stressed." Devon leaned against the house, face buried in his hands. "Bro," he choked out, "we threw out a freaking millionaire." Mrs. Jennings, arms still crossed, stepped closer, not to comfort them, but because she needed them to hear her. "You didn't throw out a millionaire," she said sternly. "You threw out a good man." They all quieted. "You threw out a father who worked himself raw so you could live comfortable," she went on. "A father who gave you love he never got himself. A father who deserved kindness, not cruelty." The siblings didn't answer. They didn't have anything left to defend. "We didn't know," Michael said weakly. Mrs. Jennings' eyes narrowed. "And if he really had been broke, if he had nothing at all, would you still have treated him like that?" Nobody spoke. That silence was the real truth. Jasmine stuttered, wiping her face. We have to fix this. We just have to." Mrs. Jennings shook her head. "Fixing starts with honesty, and y'all ain't been honest with him or yourselves in years." Devon pushed off the wall. "We'll get him back. I know we will. Dad loves us." Jennings's voice softened now. Not mean, just heartbreakingly honest. "He does love you," she said. "But love ain't a shield, and even the kindest hearts break when you stomp on 'em long enough." The siblings bowed their heads. For the first time, they understood. Their father didn't leave because he was rich. He left because they were poor in compassion. Robert escorted Thomas into a luxury penthouse suite reserved for major board members when they traveled. High ceilings, clean white walls, glass windows stretching from floor to ceiling, overlooking the glowing city. It was beautiful. It was empty. Thomas stepped inside slowly, almost hesitant, like he wasn't sure he belonged in a place so polished. "This is yours as long as you need it," Robert said. Thomas nodded politely, but didn't move beyond the entryway. He stood there, suitcase in hand, staring at the carpet. The silence, the echo of his own breathing. He finally spoke. "I never wanted this." Robert frowned. "Sir?" Thomas's voice cracked. "I wanted a home, not a penthouse. I wanted kids who saw me, not my money. I wanted family, not fear." Robert stepped closer. "You have those things," he said gently. "Just not all in one place." Thomas walked slowly toward the window. Cars glowed below like tiny fireflies. The sky above was wide and dark. The world fell. "My wife used to say," he murmured, "Thomas, don't you ever be ashamed of what you've lost. It just makes room for what you'll gain." He swallowed hard. "I didn't expect the thing I'd lose to be my own children." He pressed a trembling hand against the glass. "I raised them better than that," he said. "I know I did." Robert's voice softened. "You raised them with love, but life raised them with pride." Thomas closed his eyes, and for the first time since the morning chaos, he sobbed, quietly, shoulders shaking, one hand covering his mouth. He cried for the years he gave, the sacrifices they forgot, the birthdays he planned alone, the apologies he never asked for, the dinners they refused, the hugs they stopped giving, the love he poured into cups they kept spilling. He cried. For them, for himself, for all the moments he'd pretended were okay. Robert stayed beside him, but didn't touch him. He understood that some grief needed space, not company. When Thomas finally caught his breath, he whispered, "They said I wasn't their real dad." Robert clenched his jaw. They were wrong. Thomas wiped his eyes with a shaky hand. "Doesn't matter if they were wrong. Hurt still feels the same." He turned away from the window, stood tall, and finally let truth settle into his bones. "I can't go back to them. Not yet." Robert nodded. "You don't have to." Thomas lifted his suitcase and set it gently on the floor. "I need time," he said, "to think, to heal, to figure out how to love my children without letting them hurt me anymore." His voice trembled, but it didn't break. Not this time. And in that soft, quiet declaration, something inside him shifted. He wasn't the man they walked over anymore. He wasn't the soft-spoken dad who hid behind old sweaters. He wasn't the man who begged for kindness. He was a father reclaiming his dignity, one breath at a time. The next few days passed in a slow, quiet blur. Thomas woke each morning in the penthouse feeling out of place. The bed was too soft, the air too still, the silence too heavy. Wealth didn't comfort him. It only reminded him of everything money couldn't fix. But for the first time in years, he wasn't walking on eggshells. He wasn't being dismissed. He wasn't being told he was a burden. He could breathe. Robert visited often, bringing documents, updates from the board, and soft reminders that Thomas didn't have to rush into anything. "You're allowed to rest," he would say. Thomas appreciated it, but rest felt foreign. His hands longed for something real: soil, wood, warm dishes, something that reminded him he still had purpose. So he poured himself into work, not for money, for meaning. The board meeting was held 2 days later. The moment Thomas stepped into the expansive glass-walled conference room, Every executive rose to their feet. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, whispers rippled through the room. This was not the old man his children mocked. This was a founder, a visionary, a man who had built the empire they stood in. Thomas nodded politely and took his seat, the seat labeled Avery T. His name, his legacy. The agenda began, but Thomas lifted a hand gently. "Before we talk business," he said, voice even but firm, "I want to talk about people." Executives exchanged glances. Thomas looked around the table. Money is important. Growth is important. But a company, just like a family, is nothing without respect. Robert exhaled softly, a proud smile pulling at his lips. Thomas continued, "We move forward with the expansion, but we do it with integrity. No cutting corners, no abandoning smaller communities, and no forgetting the workers who built us." The room murmured in agreement. A vote was cast, unanimous approval. The project was officially greenlit. Not because they needed Thomas's, but because they trusted his heart more than any spreadsheet. After the meeting, Thomas didn't return to the penthouse immediately. He asked Robert to drive him somewhere first. They pulled in front of an old brick building, a youth center that had been closed for years due to lack of funding. Thomas stood in front of it quietly, hands in his pockets. "My wife wanted a place like this," he said softly. "A spot where kids who got left behind could feel seen. Safe." Robert nodded slowly. "It's a good building, sir. Strong bones. It could be restored." Thomas smiled. "Yes, it can." He donated millions, anonymously, to reopen the center. Renovations began within the week. He didn't tell his children, not yet. He wasn't doing it for applause. He was doing it because the world needed more kindness than his own kids had shown him. A week passed before he heard from them. It began with a short text from Michael. "Dad, can we please talk? All of us? We're sorry. Really sorry." Then Jasmine sent, "Please let us see you. We need to fix this." Then Devon, "Dad, I miss you. I swear we'll be better. Just give us a chance." Thomas read every message slowly. Then he set the phone down and didn't respond for a full day. Not out of spite, out of careful thought. He finally replied, "Tomorrow at 3 p.m. My office, not the house." He didn't add a heart, didn't add "love you." Not this time. The children arrived early, sitting stiffly in the waiting area of the penthouse-level office space assigned to Thomas. They looked small, nervous, not entitled, not loud, just fragile in a way they hadn't been since childhood. When Thomas entered, they stood quickly. "Dad," Michael whispered. Jasmine's eyes filled immediately. Devon stared at the floor. Thomas took a seat behind the sleek conference table, not to intimidate them, but to remind himself he had authority now, authority he would use to protect his heart. "Sit," he said gently. They did. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Jasmine broke. "We're sorry," she whispered, tears spilling. "Not because of the money, not because of what we found out. We're sorry for how we treated you, for everything." Thomas's expression softened just slightly. Michael nodded. "Dad, we lost ourselves. Somewhere along the way, we got selfish, arrogant, blind, and we hurt the only person who ever gave a damn about us." Devon wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I was wrong, Dad. So wrong. I don't want anything from you. I just want my father back." The vulnerability in their voices shook him. His heart wasn't made of stone, but it wasn't unguarded anymore either. "I forgive you," Thomas said quietly. Their shoulders sagged in relief. Jasmine released a sob. But, he added softly, forgiveness does not erase what happened, and love doesn't mean letting yourself be hurt again. They nodded vigorously, understanding. Thomas continued, if you want to be in my life, you must treat me with respect, not when I'm wealthy, not when I have power, but because I'm your father. Yes, Michael whispered, we will. And, Thomas said gently but firmly, you will give back, you will volunteer, serve others, and rebuild your character. Long before you ever touch a cent of anything I own. Devin nodded. Whatever you ask. Jasmine swallowed hard. We want to be better. Not for money. For you. Thomas studied their faces. Not the desperation, but the sincerity growing behind it. Finally, he nodded. We will start slow, he said. We will rebuild, but I need time and you need discipline. It wasn't a warm reunion. It wasn't a movie-style hugfest. It was real, raw, healing with boundaries. They stood. Jasmine hesitated, then asked quietly, Can we hug you, Dad? Thomas paused, then opened his arms. They folded into him, all at once, the way they had years ago when they were small and terrified of thunder. This time, the storm had been their own doing. But the shelter? The shelter was the same. A good man. A gentleman. A father who had loved them, even when they didn't love him back. Over the next weeks, Thomas volunteered at the youth center. But children joined him, awkward at first, then slowly with more purpose. Michael helped build shelves. Jasmine taught art classes. Devin coached basketball for younger kids. None of it erased what happened, but each act softened its edges. Thomas visited often, giving pointers, fixing sinks, sweeping the halls, the things he loved, the things that kept him humble. People began calling the place Avery House, and for the first time in years, Thomas felt like home wasn't a physical place. It was a choice he made every day. The Avery House Youth Center buzzed softly with life as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. Children's laughter echoed through the halls. Basketballs thumped gently on. Art brushes tapped against little plastic cups of paint. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Thomas Avery walked quietly down the corridor, hands tucked loosely behind his back, studying the walls, freshly lined with drawings made by the kids. One drawing stopped him. A simple sketch. 3 stick figures, a boy, a girl, and a man with a gray hat. The kids had labeled it in childish handwriting. Mr. Thomas, our hero. He chuckled softly under his breath, shaking his head. Hero. He never felt like one. He'd lived most of his life feeling small, feeling unseen, feeling like someone the world passed by without noticing. But standing here now, surrounded by the voices of children he'd chosen to uplift, not for glory, but because kindness felt like breathing, he realized something. He had finally become the man his late wife always believed he could be. Mrs. Jennings entered from the hallway, carrying a tray of freshly baked cookies. "You gonna stare at that drawing all day, Thomas?" she teased. He grinned. "Might do just that. These kids think I'm taller than I am." She glanced at him warmly. "You look 10 feet tall to the people who matter." He nodded, touched. Jasmine stepped out from the art room, wiping her hands on a towel. "Dad, the kids want you to see their mural. It's really beautiful." Michael appeared from behind her with a clipboard. "And we need your approval on the new after-school schedule." Devin poked his head out from the gym door. "And I need you to teach those boys how to do that hook shot you used to do. I can't get it right, man." Thomas's heart swelled. They weren't perfect. They weren't fixed overnight. But they were trying. Their tone was softer. Their eyes were kinder. Their hearts were opening again. He looked at the three of them, grown but suddenly young again, the kids he had scraped by for, sacrificed for, prayed for, the kids he had nearly lost. He clasped his hands in front of him and smiled. "All right," he said softly. "Let's go see what y'all been working on." They walked together toward the main recreation hall. Something eased inside him with each step. Not forgiveness, that had already happened. Not forgetting, that never would. But peace, the kind of peace he had chased his whole life.